She had $14. 14 for the whole month. In today's world, that might not even cover a single meal, but in 1944, it was her entire world. The butcher had nothing. The shelves were half empty. Her neighbor was crying quietly behind a closed door. And yet, by December, she had money left over. Not because she was lucky, not because her husband sent more from overseas. It was because of a hidden list she scribbled on the back of a ration book, a secret that has been lost to time. But what happened next, no one saw coming. Her real story didn't start with success. It started with a decision no one noticed, a decision that we are going to uncover today.
Her name was Dorothy Marsh, not a senator's wife, not a woman with connections or savings or a family safety net, just a 31-year-old mother of three standing in her kitchen at 5:47 in the morning, staring at a coffee tin that held everything she had left. $42. That was September. Now it was October, and the tin held 11. She didn't panic, not outwardly. Dorothy had learned early that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Same as butter, same as new shoes, same as calling her sister long distance just to hear a familiar voice. Her husband, Earl, was somewhere in France. She got letters, but they arrived late and said little. The censors made sure of that. What she knew was simple. He was alive. What she felt was something harder to name. The children were still sleeping. Thomas was 8. Ruthie was 6. The baby, Clara, had just turned 2 and still woke sometimes in the night calling for her father. Dorothy folded Earl's last letter and slipped it into her apron pocket. She did this every morning, not for sentiment, though there was plenty of that, but because it steadied her hands. She opened the ration book on the counter, ran one finger down the stamps like she was reading scripture. Sugar, meat, canned goods, each stamp a small permission, each permission already mapped out in her head before the week even began. The neighbors thought she was quiet, reserved, a little cold maybe. They didn't know she was calculating every single minute of the day. She picked up a pencil, turned to the back of the ration book, the blank page the government left empty, probably thinking nobody would use it. Dorothy used it. She wrote one word at the top: enough. Not a wish, a decision. If you've ever looked at your own finances and felt that quiet tightening in your chest, that silent question of will we make it, then you already know exactly what Dorothy felt standing in that kitchen. Stay with this story, because what she did next was so simple and so overlooked that most people walked right past it. How did she even begin? She didn't read a book about budgeting. There were no seminars, no advisors, no one telling her what to do with money she barely had. What she had was a pencil, a blank page, and the terrifying clarity that comes when there is no room left for mistakes. She wrote the number down, $11.30. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote the month, October 1944. The number on the right side of the page was higher than $11.30. She didn't crumple the paper. She didn't cry. Not yet, anyway. She just sat with that number the way you sit with something you can't change but have to face. Then she did something unusual. She crossed out what she wanted the month to cost, and she wrote what it had to cost. There was a difference, a small one, but real. The coal could wait one more week. They still had some. Thomas's shoe could be fixed with a strip of rubber and a little adhesive, at least until mid-month. The bread she could stretch with cornmeal if she was careful. She was always careful. But this morning felt different. This wasn't just survival instinct clicking in. This was a decision with a shape to it, a structure, like she was building something, even if she couldn't see the whole form yet. Ruthie padded into the kitchen in her socks, looked at her mother with sleepy eyes. "Mama, is there oatmeal?" Dorothy closed the ration book over her notes, smiled the kind of smile that takes effort. "There's always oatmeal," she said. And there was, because she had planned for it. That small exchange, so ordinary, so quiet, was the first real test of her new discipline, and she passed it without the children ever knowing there was a test at all. But the grocery store would test her resolve in ways the kitchen never could. Dorothy went to the store on a Tuesday, never Saturday. Prices shifted by the weekend, and the good cuts were already gone. She carried a list, but not the kind of list most women carried. Hers started with ingredients, not meals. That was the difference. Most people walked in thinking, "I need soup, I need bread, I need something for Sunday dinner." Dorothy walked in thinking, "What does flour become? What can I do with dried beans 3 different ways?" She stood in front of the canned goods for almost 4 minutes. A woman next to her grabbed 2 cans of tomatoes without looking and moved on. Dorothy read the weights, compared, put one back. The butcher had a small piece of beef shin, not glamorous, not the kind of thing you'd choose if you had options. Dorothy had it wrapped. She knew that shin, simmered long enough, would give her a broth that could carry 2 meals, maybe 3, if she added root vegetables and didn't let the children eat until they were truly hungry, not just bored. The produce was limited. She chose carrots, onions, a small cabbage, things that kept, things that worked in everything. At the register, the total came to $2.14. She had budgeted $2.20, 6 cents left over. She felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not happiness exactly, something quieter than that, a small private dignity. Walking home with her basket, she passed Mrs. Henley from the next block, who shook her head at the near-empty butcher window. "It's getting worse every week," Mrs. Henley said. Dorothy nodded. "You make do with what's there." She said it simply, not as advice, just as fact. But groceries weren't the biggest threat waiting for her at home. The heating bill had gone up. Not by much, but when you've already planned every cent, not much means everything. Dorothy opened the envelope twice, as if the number might change on second reading. It didn't. She set it down, picked up the ration book, counted the remaining stamps for the month. Meat stamps, nearly gone. Sugar, 1 left. Coffee, she'd been rationing the grounds, reusing them once before throwing them out. The second cup was weak and bitter, but she drank it without complaint. The ration system was both a comfort and a cage. A comfort because it meant everyone was in the same position. No one could simply buy their way out of the shortage. A cage because no matter how clever you were, there were hard limits. Stamps ran out, shelves emptied, certain things simply weren't available, and wanting them more didn't help. Thomas came home from school that afternoon with a note from his teacher, a field trip, 50 cents. Dorothy read the note, folded it, set it beside the heating bill. Thomas watched her face carefully, the way children do when they already sense the answer but haven't heard it yet. She looked at him. "We'll figure it out," she said. That night, she talked to Thomas and Ruthie after dinner. Not about money. She would never frighten them with numbers, but she told them they were a team. That teams made decisions together. She asked Thomas if the field trip was something he truly wanted. His answer surprised her. "Only if it's okay, Mama." She put 50 cents aside the next morning. She found it by skipping her own lunch twice that week. The children never knew. But the real test came mid-month. It wasn't a disaster, not the kind that announces itself loudly. It was quieter than that. A letter from the landlord, polite, formal. The furnace in the building needed a part replaced. Each tenant, $3 toward the repair, due by the 22nd. Dorothy read it standing at the door, rain dripping from the mailbox behind her. $3. She walked to the kitchen, sat down, pulled out her notebook.
Not the ration book, a separate small notebook she'd started keeping just for numbers. She opened it to October's page. She had $1.80 left in the tin. $3, $1.80. The gap was real, and it wasn't closing on its own. She went through every line on the page, looking for something she'd missed, a softness somewhere, an edge she hadn't trimmed yet. There wasn't much. The only untouched category was food, and food was already stretched to the edge of what was reasonable. Her hands were still on the table, very still. That was always the tell with Dorothy. When she went completely still, the thinking was happening fast and deep. Clara wandered in and climbed onto her lap without asking, the way toddlers do. Dorothy held her without speaking, just breathed. And then, quiet as a turned page, she made a decision. Not a dramatic one. No one would have noticed from the outside. But inside, something shifted. She stopped looking at the problem as a wall and started looking at it as a door. She picked up her pencil. She made one bold move. She wrote 2 columns, left side, what she had, right side, what it could become. This wasn't magic. It wasn't clever tricks or shortcuts. It was something much harder. It was looking at almost nothing and deciding to treat it like something. The half bag of dried beans in the pantry, the small jar of baking drippings she'd been saving for weeks, the cabbage still firm, 3 potatoes, a heel of cornbread from Sunday. She mapped every item, not just what it was, but what it could turn into over the next 10 days. The beans would become soup. The soup, stretched with water and a little salt, would feed the children 2 nights running. The drippings would go into the cornbread batter she'd make Thursday. It would taste richer than it had any right to. The cabbage, sliced thin and cooked down slowly, would go beside whatever protein she could manage. She cut her own portions without telling anyone. Not dramatically, she just served herself last and served herself less. When Ruthie asked why Mama's bowl looked different, Dorothy smiled and said she wasn't very hungry that evening. She said it 4 times that week. The $3 gap began to close, not all at once, a little from the food column, a little from skipping the coal delivery 1 more week. She layered the children in extra socks and put them to bed earlier when the house was still holding the day's warmth. By the 19th, she had $2.60 in the tin, 40 cents short. She sat with that number, turned it over in her mind the way you turn a stone in your hand. Not defeated, just thinking. She had one option left, one she hadn't wanted to use, but pride nearly ruined everything. She stood at Mrs. Paulson's door for almost 2 minutes before she knocked. Agnes Paulson was 63, a widow. She'd lived on Clement Street longer than anyone and knew everyone's business without ever seeming to ask. She wasn't unkind, just observant in that way that made some people nervous. Dorothy had never asked anyone for anything, not since Earl left, not before that even. It was the way she was raised. You handled your own. You didn't let people see the thin parts. But 40 cents was 40 cents. She knocked. Agnes opened the door in her house dress, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Dorothy didn't make a speech. She'd rehearsed one on the walk over and abandoned it at the porch step. Instead, she said simply, "Agnes, I'm 40 cents short on the furnace repair. I'll pay it back first week of November. Earl's allotment comes the 3rd. Silence. Just a moment of it. Agnes looked at her, not with pity, which Dorothy could not have borne, but with something more even. Recognition, maybe. "Come in," Agnes said. "I'll put the kettle on." She didn't make a fuss about the 40 cents. She pressed 2 quarters into Dorothy's palm over the kitchen table, and then talked for 20 minutes about her garden and a letter from her son in California, and let Dorothy finish her tea before saying goodbye. Walking home, Dorothy felt something strange moving through her chest. Not shame. She'd expected shame and braced for it. This was different.
lighter. She realized halfway down the block that asking for help hadn't broken anything. It had just been hard, and then it had been done.
7 days sounds like enough until you're living them one at a time. Dorothy woke each morning of that final week before the children and stood in the kitchen doing a quiet accounting. Not with paper, she had it memorized by now. Every cent had a name, every meal had a purpose. Monday, bean soup again, but she added an onion this time, and the smell filled the apartment in a way that made it feel like abundance. Thomas ate 2 bowls. She counted that as a small victory. Tuesday, she used the last of the cornmeal for a simple porridge, sweetened it with the last half stamp of sugar. Clara ate it without fuss, which was itself a miracle. Wednesday was harder. The pantry was down to almost nothing, and payday, Earl's allotment, was still 11 days away. She found 2 eggs she'd been saving, scrambled them soft with a little water instead of milk, divided them 3 ways, ate nothing herself, and told the children she'd had something earlier. She hadn't. Thursday, she walked to the church pantry 2 blocks over. She'd volunteered there twice in September, helping sort donations on Saturday mornings. The woman who ran it, a broad-shouldered woman named Helen, knew her by name. Dorothy didn't ask for charity. She asked if there was any sorting work she could do in exchange for a few staples. Helen handed her a bag of dried oats and a small tin of evaporated milk without making her sort a single thing. "We look after each other," Helen said, the same way you'd say something obvious. Dorothy thanked her and walked home in the thin October sunlight, the bag against her side, feeling the particular warmth of a kindness that asks nothing in return. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, she stretched. She managed. She did not waste a single thing. The furnace repair was paid. The rent was paid. The children were fed. Would it be enough? She added the final numbers on the last morning of the month. Her handwriting was small and neat, the way it always was when she was being careful. She went through every line, every entry, every small adjustment and quiet sacrifice, and borrowed quarter and skipped meal. When she reached the bottom of the page, she sat back in her chair. She had 11 cents left. 11 cents. Not 0, not overdrawn, not a debt carried forward into November, with its weight already bending the next month before it even started. 11 cents. She didn't celebrate. There was no one to celebrate with, not really. The children were asleep. Earl was across an ocean, and the moment was too interior, too private for noise. She just sat with it. The heating bill was paid. The landlord's furnace repair was paid. Thomas had gone on the field trip. Clara had never gone to bed hungry, not once. Ruthie had new hair ribbons, not bought, but cut from an old blouse Dorothy had stopped wearing, the blue silk one she'd had since before the war. It wasn't a sacrifice that hurt. It was just a choice, made quietly, in the direction of what mattered. She wrote the 11 cents at the bottom of the page. Then she wrote one more line beneath it, small enough that you'd miss it if you weren't looking. We made it. Not triumphant, not loud, just true. She closed the notebook, set the pencil down, listened to the apartment, the tick of the radiator, Clara's soft breathing through the open door, the distant sound of a milk truck on the street below. October 1944 was over. She had come through it not because things had gotten easier, not because the war had ended or the rationing had lifted or money had appeared from somewhere unexpected. She had come through it because she had made a decision on the very first morning, that word she wrote at the top of the page, and she had honored it every single day, without fanfare and without quitting. She put the kettle on. It was November now. There was more to do.
We don't remember people like Dorothy Marsh. History keeps records of battles and declarations and the names of men who signed things. It doesn't tend to record a woman in a small Ohio kitchen who kept her family warm and fed through the hardest month of a very hard year, using nothing but discipline and a pencil and the quiet refusal to give up. But she existed. Women like her existed everywhere. In every town that sent its men overseas, there were women doing math at kitchen tables at 5 in the morning, women who cut their own portions and said they weren't hungry, women who asked for help when it was the last thing they wanted to do, and who paid back every cent, and who woke the next morning and started again. They didn't call it budgeting. They didn't call it anything. It was just what you did when love was the reason and giving up wasn't an option. What Dorothy understood, without anyone teaching it to her, without a book or a program or a system with a name, was that a dollar is not just a dollar. It's a choice. And a choice, made carefully and consistently, becomes something larger than itself over time. She didn't get rich in October 1944. She got something harder to come by. She got through. And on the other side of getting through is something most people never see coming, the slow, quiet accumulation of a life that holds together. Month by month, decision by decision, each small choice a single thread, and the threads, over time, becoming something strong enough to carry the weight of everything that matters. Earl came home in the spring of 1945. He walked through the door, and Dorothy was at the stove, the children already running toward him from the hallway, and the apartment smelled like something good. He looked at her over the chaos of small arms and noise, and she looked back at him, and something passed between them that didn't need words. She had held it together, all of it, every piece. The notebook was still on the shelf. The tin had more in it than it did when he left. And Dorothy, quiet, careful, unhurried Dorothy, had already started planning for summer.